Great to see everyone here. And for those who do not know me, I'm Eric Zabriskie, the rector of Christ Church. And, Ian, you'll get a kick out of this. The last person I interviewed here was in outer space.
No way.
So, as famous and as wild as it is and great to have you here,
Yeah.
last person was out at the International Space Station.
No kidding.
And she just touched down on Tuesday. We're so glad she's safe. She went up there for a 10-day short mission trip into outer space, and it turned out to be 9 months. So it's funny how the twists and turns of life go. But we're so thrilled to have you back here. You are renowned for your podcast. You've had 20 million downloads. That's really remarkable. And you're a psychotherapist, an ordained Episcopal priest. You won a Dove Award for faith-based music. You have left us high and dry here in Greenwich to go down to Nash Vegas. Love that city. Great country music. By the way, do you ever get to the Station Inn?
I was just at the Station Inn Monday night.
I love it. I love that place.
It was for those who don't know, the Station Inn is this very unattractive cinder block like national heritage site, but it is the home of really bluegrass music in Nashville. So on any given night, you could just be sitting there eating a po' boy at the Station Inn, and in will walk Alison Krauss and Vince Gill, or who just to get up on the stage and play a song or two. And
I didn't know they had po' boys there. They have like the world's worst pizza.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Okay, draft beer, popcorn.
Yeah, bad
but
popcorn.
The best music.
Yeah, the
Just
best
incredible.
music
So you were up here for 5 years with Neely Tao. Had a great run with her, and then you started Trinity Church and had a great run there for 10 years, and you left 15 years ago, right?
It's hard to believe, 15 years ago, yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. That, but the legend of Jan Cron lives on,
Yeah.
and that's the important thing. And you've been involved
Half
in...
the people here I owe money to. That's why they're here.
Yeah.
That's most of these people are looking for payoff.
Right.
They're finally here.
Yeah, when the royalties come in, you're going to win big time.
Yeah, right.
So you've been involved in the 12-step program for 30 years, and you believe that all of us kind of have an addiction of one sort or another, and so that the 12-step program can speak to each one of us in our life. So I just want to let you know how grateful we are for you to be here at Courage and Faith and to come back to Greenwich, where you've made such a huge impact. And while you're doing phenomenal stuff now, I've just did a blitz read through The Fix, and this is for sale. I wouldn't be promoting this if I don't really believe in it. I think it's an outstanding book. It's got an incredibly compelling read that engages you, and you're so freaking vulnerable in this. I mean, it's amazing. I think the leadership today, one of the most important things is someone who can be vulnerable. And we see this in politicians that they can't. They can't admit that they made a mistake or messed up, got it wrong, but they've learned from it. The press will often crucify them. And a lot of clergy struggle with this, but authentic leadership is people who can be vulnerable. And you just draw us in. So I can't recommend this book enough because, you open up the kimono, so to speak, and talk about a lot of things that made this book a pure extension of your life and spiritual journey. So you write in The Fix that the 12 steps have restored your life. Can you share a bit more about that? You talked about in your book that addiction didn't just run through your family, it galloped through your family. Man, that's an honest statement. So start to unpack that, will you? Because we'd love to hear about what you've dealt with.
That is the truth, yeah. Well, first of all, it is wonderful to be back, and it is great to see so many of you, and even Rob Mathis is here, ladies and gentlemen. I know I have hit the big time, that Rob is here. So I point Rob out because it speaks to my history here. I grew up here. I used to play baseball in Rob's backyard when I was 12 with Ricky Fortune and Rob Mathis and many others. But as I look around the room, I see touch points of people faces and memories. And this room has memories for me, and so many things. And I have such a terrible affection for Christ Church. I know, I really mean that. I have a terrible affection for Christ Church. I felt that for many years, I'm going off in a direction I shouldn't be, but what the heck. I had a deep and profound need or desire to be a priest. And it was a very circuitous route, but a person that was so instrumental in that for me was Jim Lemler. And Jim and the entire staff in this church were so remarkably gracious and kind to this interloper who showed up saying, I'd kind of like to be a priest. And they're like, well, okay. And they welcomed me in and cared for me and said, well, welcome. And so I have such warm feelings for this place. To your original question before I went off. So the name of the book obviously is The Fix, and the subtitle kind of says it all. How the 12 Steps offer a surprising path of transformation for the well-adjusted, the down and out, and everyone in between. I have a dear friend of mine, Ashley Cleveland, who comes from a family not dissimilar to my own, and she says, I hail from an alcoholic dynasty. And as do I. My family, my father, a sibling of mine, I have aunts and uncles. I mean, it just runs like wildfire. Addiction runs like wildfire through the family. And my own journey in 12-step spirituality began in 1987 when I first entered the rooms of 12-step recovery for a problem with drinking. And which, given my history, made a little sense, right? Like in the book, in fact, I think there's a line in the book in here where I talk about something to the effect of, let me see if I can find it, because I won't say it as well as we'll do a few little readings here at some point tonight. But I said, I hail from a long line of hard-drinking, barroom brawling Irish Catholics who believed that Budweiser Marlboro Reds and making regular visits to the ER for sutures equated to living your best life. This is how I describe my family to people who ask me about my upbringing, and I always want to hear a drummer follow it up with a rim shot to punctuate the joke. But my facetious answer is a psychological defense, a way of rolling the turd in glitter. It's a strategy to avoid having to admit that my family history is more harrowing than hilarious. So, I've had a couple of runs in sobriety, and I really wanted to, after many years, I just thought, like, I got so tired of hearing people in AA meetings, right, or recovery meetings saying, don't you wish everybody had a program? Right? People would say that all the time. You go to an Al-Anon meeting or something, people would be like, don't you wish everybody had a program? And I'm like, well, why don't they? Like, why should we have all the fun? We should spread the love. And so for me, the 12 steps represent this incredible spiritual design for living that feathers so beautifully with the gospel, if in fact that's what you would like it to do. And it is just a remarkable design, or maybe I could call it even a spiritual technology that helps people enter into a depth of intimacy in their relationship with God, themselves, and others that they previously didn't know existed. And to me, that is the gospel, right? And so I'm a big fan of the 12 steps, but I'm an even bigger fan of it out of just for folks in the church basement or wherever they meet in your church, right? And let's spread it to people upstairs, because it's a program of healing and change for everybody, not just for people who identify identify classically as addicts or people with substance use disorder.
It was started by Bill Wilson, right,
Mhm.
and Sam Shoemaker, an Episcopal priest.
Yep, St. George's in Manhattan.
Yeah, and I think Christ Church hosted the second AA program in the country. I may be wrong, but
Second or third.
Okay.
I can't remember. Akron was the first. New York
Right.
at St. George's was the second. I think this, honestly, this is actually, I believe, in the loft. I'm not sure what it's called now, but the loft.
yeah.
The loft was, I believe, the site, or maybe in the family room. I don't know which, but was the site of maybe the third meeting in. Is it the third? Right, in the second. So okay, I am wrong. There you go. Here we are, folks. Ground zero almost.
Yeah. We've had like 8 to 10.
Get a glass of wine, sit down, and we'll talk to you about. The ironies
Yeah.
keep coming, friends. They keep coming.
Yeah, so we've had about 8 to 10 12-step programs meeting here every week for ages. So can you tell folks who don't know about the 12-step program about the spiritual roots and how that kind of
Yeah.
developed?
Well, and if there are any AA historians here, forgive me if I don't get this entirely right. But so it began with a man named, several people that actually began before you, right? They came into contact with Bill Wilson. But in short, there was a Christian organization called the Oxford Group in the 1930s, and they had a program that was organized around 6 steps. Bill Wilson was dying in a hospital from alcoholism. And you have to remember that in the 1930s, right, if you were an alcoholic, you were deemed hopeless. There was no solution. No doctors really wanted to deal with you, right? Like, no solution. You were going to die in a hospital or a sanitarium, something like that. And it was a great puzzle to the medical community. It was a great puzzle to people who suffered from it, right? And so Bill Wilson is in the hospital. He's visited by a good friend who tells him he's had a spiritual awakening. He's found religion, and that he hasn't had a drink in a considerable amount of time, months at that point, I think. Wilson's so desperate by this point, does what this friend encourages him to do. He has this profound spiritual awakening in the hospital, and goes on to be involved with the Oxford Group. He took the 6 steps that the Oxford Group used as their kind of spiritual curriculum, expanded them out to 12, and then he and Dr. Bob began what today is, we know as Alcoholics Anonymous. And now, of course, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of 12-step groups for people who identify not necessarily as alcoholics or substance use, people with substance use disorder, but Gamblers Anonymous, Spenders Anonymous, gambling, overeating, the list is, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of groups that are organized around the 12 steps that have led people into lives of physical and emotional sobriety and a depth of life that they didn't know they could possibly ever have again, It's so beautiful. And I think it's a shame that we don't actually assign the big book of AA, which is the kind of the seminal text that is used in that community, in colleges, in religion, in seminary programs, that they should be read as just a great piece of American spiritual literature.
Yeah. So when I was in seminary at Yale Divinity School, I took a course on counseling, and one of the things they did is they had us attend an AA meeting. And they said, you're going to have lots of people in the years ahead who are going to be in these meetings or need to go to one of these meetings, and you need to learn about them. So I went with a young lady who was also in my class. We went to the Center Church on the Green in New Haven. Mm-hmm. We're down there in the basement. There's a coffee urn, a lot of people smoking, and the program gets started, and in walks my seminary roommate, who was not in the class. And that's how I learned he was in a 12-step program, and began to understand more about the impact of that program in his life and how it was like a life preserver to him.
Yeah.
You took your first drink when you were 8 years old, Dewar's Scotch.
Yeah.
And that's, the chance of someone who has their first drink before the age of 12 of becoming an alcoholic is huge. So how did this journey, the 12-step journey, transform you? Because it started early. You were raised in a family,
Yeah.
with lots of people dealing with it. Can you tell us a little bit about what that journey was like?
Yeah, well, I mean, I certainly wasn't an alcoholic at age 8, but but I was clearly fascinated with it because drinking was such a big part of our family life, right? Like, it was at the center of family. I was probably I got sober in my late 20s, and this was back at a time when there was no treatment or rehabilitation hospital kinds of programs that were widely available. Maybe there was Betty Ford and there was Hazelden, maybe, or Silver Hill, right, in Connecticut, right? But it was not something that was widely available to regular people. Like, if you had a drink problem, you had to go find a church that had an AA meeting. And I went to a therapist. This therapist was great. Little did I know, by the way, that when I went to see this guy, that he was in recovery. I was in trouble, and this guy, in my first meeting with him, smelled me out. And he said, I won't see you until you address your problem with drinking. And of course, my reaction to that was, right, which was, how dare you, I, sir, am not an alcoholic. And I quote her in the book, but Anne Lamott has this great line. She says that trying to reason with an alcoholic is like trying to blow out a light bulb. And
I love that line.
And I was in that stage of needing repair. And so I had a bad incident that led me back there 2 weeks later at the strong encouragement of my new wife. And that began my journey in recovery. Now, in the book, you mentioned it's very vulnerable, and I talk about a relapse that happened for me after decades and decades in 2020, and which was the impetus for this book in many ways. I won't go into all the details of it. It was a brief but unkind reminder of the nature of addiction. It's just what it is. And to your point about vulnerability and sharing the secrets of our lives, I was very influenced by a number of writers as a guy growing up, but one in particular was Frederick Buechner. And Frederick Buechner, in a number of his memoirs, was very, very vulnerable. And I found such tremendous healing in those books, Telling Secrets, among others. And Buechner wrote extensively about his involvement in, like, Al-Anon, I think, or actually it was for his daughter, and it was a 12-step group to help parents. I think maybe his daughter had an eating disorder, I think. And I think I learned very early, also from songwriting and other places, that vulnerability is the currency of relationship and transformation. If we don't tell the truth about our lives, particularly as we get older, like we need to tell the truth about our lives. When we tell the truth about our lives to others, it opens up the opportunity for healing to happen. That's been my experience. And to close it off, in fact, Buechner has a great essay. You've probably read it. It's maybe the best sort of explications of the parable of the talents I've ever read. But he talks about how when, you bury your... The parable of the talents, right, he sort of makes an equivalent to this idea that when you bury your pain and you don't share it with others, right, then you are a poor steward of your suffering. that you must share what you have learned, right? So a lot of this book was born out of that belief and some of those influences. It was very uncomfortable to write, but I mean, if a book doesn't make you a little uncomfortable as the author, then maybe you haven't got much to say. I mean, you should have a little bit of a lump in your throat when you release a book, when it goes out into the world, or what risks have you taken? I think there has to be a risk.
Tell us about the name, the fix. In it, you mentioned that the fix is seeking an external solution to an internal problem.
Yeah.
Can you unpack that a bit for us?
Yeah, so you all know, like when people talk about, I need a fix, right? What they're saying is, I need something to help ease whatever inner distress I am experiencing in the moment. And sometimes we say it as a joke, right? We talk about coffee. I'm having my daily fix, or more seriously, right? So it was a double entendre, right? Like, obviously, I was talking about the fix, right? But the premise of the book really was, too, that everybody is looking for a fix. So let me just say something right now. This book is how do I want to say this? If you think when reading this book you're going to be reading about those people, you are sorely wrong. Because I don't actually believe there is such a thing as those people. Like, it is the nature, it is the human condition. None of us, or I should say it this way, all of us are addicts. Now, on the continuum from mild to severe, I don't know where you are, but everybody, it is in the human condition. In fact, let me just read you something here, give you a little taste of the book about this. I write this. The Buddhists have a word that perfectly describes the human condition, dukkha. In Pali, an ancient language used in some Buddhist texts, this word translates to suffering, the source of which is a vague, underlying feeling of unease, inner lack, dissatisfaction, inquietude. But I prefer how author and teacher Ethan Nichtern translates the word dukkha as the feeling of not at home. The feeling of not at home. Not since Adam and Eve were banished from Eden and the prodigal son flipped off his father have any of us really felt at home in the world. We are fractions yearning to become whole numbers. We have unnameable desires and unattended sorrows we don't know what to do with. We are filled with an inconsolable longing for what Ann Porter calls that far-off and half-forgotten country we half remember, and Christian apologist C.S. Lewis describes as a land we know exists but have never yet visited. In short, you and I were made for paradise, but we feel like we're stuck in a Motel 6 on the border between heaven and earth. This feeling of spiritual homelessness also shows up in the form of the inescapable pain that comes with living in a fallen world. We struggle with unresolved trauma, unfulfilled needs, grief, resentment, fractured relationships, a confidence deficit, insecurities that rob us of the lives we want to enjoy, and disappointment not only in ourselves, but in those we think should have loved us better but didn't. Life shouldn't be this way, we cry. No, it shouldn't. But here we are. Then I go on and I say, how do we deal with this? Well, we seek little hits of pleasure that distract us from facing our dukkha and numb our trauma from those million little emotional muggings we have experienced along life's way. We spend hours in front of computer screens late at night watching porn while our family sleeps. We become technology addicts. Sorry if you're reading this on your Kindle or iPad. Control addicts, internet addicts, workaholics, relationship addicts, people-pleasing addicts, alcohol and drug addicts, drama addicts, video game junkies, sugar addicts, sex addicts, social media addicts, perfectionism addicts, status seeking addicts, sports junkies, plastic surgery addicts, tattoo, and the list goes on and on. All of you are slowly going like this. like this. I go through this long list here and I say, you know where I'm going with all this, right? We are all addicts. It's what humans do with their pain. No one's exempt. Not even Mr. Rogers or the Dalai Lama. As psychiatrist Gerald May writes, to be alive is to be addicted, and to be alive and addicted is to stand in need of grace. So, premise of the book is that all of us need the 12 steps, because it's not a matter of those people and us, it's all of us are on the look for fixes all the time. And every fix that we indulge or give our hearts to diminishes our relationship with God, ourselves, and others. And so we must look at them and find a program that would support us live without the need for them.
So you're right that virtually all addicts feel like as long as they can recall, something significant has been missing in their life. And they're kind of going through the motions, but they know this thing's missing. And many people say there's this God-shaped hole in every human being. And we try to stuff, gambling or cigarettes or drugs or alcohol or porn or, success or power in that hole to fill it.
Yeah.
But it just keeps going through it in a way.
Yes.
So what would you say tonight to someone who said, I think you're speaking to me. I can hear this. Who might not see themselves as an addict of sorts. What would you recommend as a first step?
Well, it's interesting, when you look at steps, the very first step is we admitted we were powerless over, if you were in AA, we'd say alcohol, but you can insert your fix of choice. We admitted we were powerless over blank, that lives had become unmanageable. That is the only step you have to do 100% perfectly. The rest, you can do your best. Through 12, do your best, get on it, but do your best. But one you have to do perfectly, which is the admission, is to take an honest, hard look at your life and go, I am powerless over this relationship that I have with codependency, alcohol, drugs, whatever the thing is, right? Workaholism. By the way, workaholism, I could argue that Greenwich, Connecticut may be ground zero of workaholism in America. So, we tend to, that's a sad addiction, by the way. And as a pastor and a therapist, I have seen the devastation caused by workaholism. So let's just come up with a definition of addiction that may work for us. So an addiction is any unhealthy relationship that you have, unhealthy compulsive relationship that you have with a person, a behavior, or a substance that has mood-altering effects and negative consequences. And you keep doing it despite what it's doing to your well-being. I have treated workaholics whose lives have left a devastation in their wake is as bad as alcohol or drinking. To their health, to their relationships, to their marriages, to their children, right? But it's a socially acceptable, lauded addiction, right? So it's very insidious. It's actually quite a sad one in many ways, right? Because actually the person that is in it is actually celebrated for it, right? But it has a devastating consequence. So getting honest is the first step. It is naming our powerlessness. And here's the thing about powerlessness. And if you're a person of faith in the Christian tradition, this should not be a surprise. This is the miraculous, bizarre, upside-down calculus of the gospel. For when I am weak, then I am strong, says Paul. That when you finally admit powerlessness, then what you discover is a power greater than you that is capable of doing for you what you cannot do for yourself, which is namely stop the craziness of your life. and bring you home to yourself. Right? I mean, that's the good news of the gospel, right? Like, we have all these platitudes, 12-step meetings, right? You go in, if you have, just out of curiosity, this is not an admission that you are in a program, but how many of you have ever been to or around a 12-step meeting? Anybody? Okay, so great. All right, so they're awesome, right? So you go to a meeting, but they all have, when you first go, what happens? You get platitudes. There are platitudes everywhere, like let go and let God, and do this. And meanwhile, you go in the beginning, and it's just like, oh my gosh, this cannot work, right? And but when I think about the gospel, to me, I can't think of a better summary or statement of what the gospel is than let go. Let go. Let go of all the crazy crap you're doing that is, in your mind, making life more tolerable, but is actually making your life a misery, either quickly or slowly. You're trending in the wrong direction. That's why when we use, I love the word repent, right? Just like literally change your mind about what will make your life work. Change your mind, right?
I love your definition of that. On page 90 you wrote,
oh, please tell.
For our purposes, let's define repentance as simply having a good long think about the lies we've told ourselves for far too long concerning what will make us truly happy and what it has cost us and others.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's interesting. I was with someone the other day, and sometimes, I don't know, sometimes I say things that surprise me. My wife would say a little too often. But I did say something the other day to them. I was rather impressed with myself. They said, oh, so-and-so has a drinking problem. And I went, okay, I appreciate what you're saying. And it was a little judgy, right? It's like, so-and-so has a drinking problem. And I was like, all right, precision in language is important here. So I said, actually, so-and-so doesn't have a drinking problem. I appreciate why you're saying that, but they do not have a drinking problem. They have a drinking solution. They have a drinking solution. It's not a problem. It is utterly logical to them in that irrational, crazy mind that we all have, right? So-and-so has a gambling solution. So-and-so has a porn solution. So-and-so has a workaholism solution. These are solutions. They are not the problem. They are misguided solutions to a problem that, and so the journey of healing then is when we abandon these ill-fated, ill-conceived, self-prescribed treatment plans and turn our attention toward the problem that they're trying to solve. Because here's the deal. Your solution, this is the sad thing about the nature of all addictions. At first, they work. They really, really work. So there's like, we laugh in my program, like we always say, at first it was drinking was fun. And then it was fun with problems. And then it was just problems. Yeah? But in the beginning, it worked. Right? So the journey then is to begin to recognize that you have come up with a solution to an internal spiritual problem, which I think it is, largely. And now the solution has become a bigger problem than the problem it was intending to solve. Now you got two problems. Right? Now your house is on fire in two different rooms. Right? Here's the crazy thing, like I would love it if we could normalize and destigmatize all conversations around addiction. Isn't it time for that? Honestly, Like, you're all going, nope, not yet. I really would love to see that happen. It is the nature. Human beings don't like pain. And when they feel pain, they go in search of ways to not feel pain. We should be very compassionate about the solutions, right? Honest, but compassionate about the solutions people come up with. Now, my hope is that what the fix does is it gives people a manual for a design for living that would help them mend and deepen their relationship with God, themselves, and others, which is what the steps are intended to do. In fact, for those of you who don't know, if you've never been to a meeting, like the reason the steps, and by the way, they're all enumerated in the book and whatnot, but the purpose of the steps is not to get you to stop drinking or taking drugs or gambling or stuff like that. It's not mentioned anywhere in the steps that way. It doesn't say, step 1, put the plug in the jug. That's not what it says. Okay, that's not what it says, right? Actually, here's the stated purpose of the 12 steps. It is that you would have a spiritual awakening of sufficient force that it would expel your desire or render unnecessary a need for an outside solution to your internal problem. We just render it unnecessary. You will have an experience of God so profound as a result of working these steps that gambling, porn, whatever your thing is, codependent relationships, whatever it is, will no longer be required. You now have found the answer to the problem, right? And that answer to the problem was a relationship with God and the world and yourself. That it's a difficult curriculum, but a beautiful one.
So one of the challenges is this word addiction.
Yeah.
My mother was an alcoholic. It took a long time for my older and younger brother to agree with that.
Yeah.
They really were expecting that an alcoholic, someone who does a face plant in the kitchen and the dog food bowl, and it's got Elpo all over their face. I don't know if they make Elpo anymore, but anyway, that dog food all over the place. But it's often beautifully masked, and people are afraid of taking that first step. Can you walk through if we have someone in our life who we're really concerned about with this, or if that person happens to be ourselves? How do we start to get on this journey, and can you walk us just through these 12 steps a little bit,
Sure.
what it's like?
Well, let me just speak to the family. So, and I have permission to talk about this. So we have my poor wife. My wife has me, and she also has my son who's in recovery. He's got several years sober now. He lives in California. He's doing great. I have a relationship. I mean, here's the crazy thing. Like, God is so strange, said the priest. I sometimes think of addiction now as a strange invitation from God. It's like a summons in the soul, like a summons to a relationship with God we did not know previously was available to us. Yeah? Can be seen that way, understood that way. So we've been around this world of addiction with my son, myself. My wife is an Al-Anon. She's a black belt Al-Anon member. I know that. The other day, in fact, when I was in the kitchen, I came into the kitchen, I was bitching about something, and I just was going off. I was so stupid. And she just was doing the dishes, and she turns around, she says, "Thanks for sharing, keep coming back." I said, okay, no more 12 steps for this family. I'm done with it. All right. Anyway, the steps, without going through all 12, because for time, and I guess we got to get to some Q&A, but think of it this way. The first 3 steps are all about repairing and deepening your relationship with God. And then 4 through 7, those steps you'll learn are about repairing and deepening your relationship with yourself. And then 8 and 9 is about deepening and repairing your relationship with others. And then 10 through 12, you'll learn are what we call the maintenance steps. And that's just how do you cultivate a life or a lifestyle, I should say, that encourages and supports growth and health in each of those 3 domains of your life moving forward, right? In your relationship with God, self, and others. I mean, basically, you know what I always laugh? I go, you know what, basically, the 12 steps are just the gospel in miniature. That's all they are. It's like operationalizing the gospel, right?
So let's talk about that, because the parable of the prodigal son is coming up in 2 weeks.
Oh.
I'm preaching on it. And you gave me great material. I mean, it's really great stuff what you unpack about that parable, about the younger brother who came to his senses, and about the older brother who needs to but did not.
Yes.
Can you just share a little bit about that parable, which you said anytime you've heard that mentioned in a 12-step program, it brings tears
Yeah.
to people's eyes?
Well, it is the quintessential recovery story. It is the quintessential recovery story. There's this kid who sure sounds, if that kid wasn't an alcoholic or an addict, he sure sounds like one. Narcissistic, self-interested, selfish, runs off with dad's money. He goes and he parties it away. But then he has this kind of like moment of in fact, he has this moment of awakening, right, where he's like, I am powerless over my life. I am now feeding the pigs. Like, my life is unmanageable, right? Oh, good. Step 1. Step 2. Maybe my dad will take me back. Well, that's step 2. And this, right, came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore us to sanity. And then he comes home. Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. Step 3, right? He comes home. I love that story. That's like, that text and the Road to Emmaus are my 2 favorite texts in Scripture. I can read them, and every time I read them, I think it's like a prism. There's something else there. And you actually, as you were even talking about it, that actually should not be called the parable of the prodigal son. It should be the parable of the older son. The older son is the one that Jesus was most concerned about. The prodigal, right? And in some ways, this book is good for older sons. The ones who say, well, I don't really have a problem. You know what I mean? It's like, this is a good book to read if you're and most of us, all of us carry within us, by the way, the elder son and the prodigal. Right? We all carry both of those children in us, yeah?
Yeah, St. Benedict describes the prodigal son is the ultimate parable for all of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And his whole rule of St. Benedict is essentially based on that.
Yeah.
That journey of getting lost.
Yeah.
And finding our way back.
Yeah, and so here's a way of thinking about it, right? Like, I think, and this is Henry Nouwen who pointed this out, we tend in our lives to over-identify who we are with the prodigal, right? How many of, every time we hear it, we think of, we're the prodigal, right? Oh, right. Okay, get over it. In a way, right? Like, the point is for us to grow into becoming like Father. That's who we should, on our spiritual journeys, eventually identify with. That we become people who are dispensers of grace and mercy toward prodigals and older sons who are resentful because they feel unseen, right? And to be able to become the Father in that story is the great possibility for us. Yeah.
Can you do this without God's help?
Great. Yep. I have this sponsor. His name is Steve, and I talk about Steve a lot in the book. He is from East Tennessee. Now, if you've never been to East Tennessee, I'm telling you, it exists. But there's no there. You know what I'm saying? And He is the most amazing, wise, crazy man I know. But one day he said to me, he says, "Now, Ian, we are well past any conversation about you fixing you." And I remember thinking, I never heard good stuff like this in seminary. You know what I mean? Like this is like we are well past any conversation about you fixing you. So here's the deal. This is the shocking news of the gospel to me too. Most people of faith with good intentions are actually engaged in a project of reformation, not transformation. They're trying to fix themselves. To make myself a better Christian. So sometimes I'll hear someone say to me something like, "I'm just trying to be a good Christian," and I'll be like, "Then you don't understand the damn gospel." If you understood the gospel, you would know that's pointless. You cannot make yourself a good Christian. See, transformation is what happens when you give up the project of, "I'm just going to keep trying hard to win the love of God and to get myself to look." A friend of mine calls that taping fruit on trees. Right? You're just taping fruit on the trees, right? Transformation is when, this is how it happens, and it's hard stuff, but it's true. In the spiritual life, transformation happens when you give God consent to do for you what you cannot do for yourself. It's about giving God permission. It's about saying yes to the yes of God. Saying yes to the God who is saying yes to you and to your life. And then suddenly, when you give God consent, suddenly you will start to see things like love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control break out in your life just naturally as the result of God's indwelling miraculous power flowing up naturally through the root system, popping out all kinds of fruit on the but legitimate fruit, right? And most people don't want to hear that because they want to stay in, the ego wants to stay in control, right? And be in charge of being like, "Well, I'm going to be really loving today for God's sake." I mean, has anyone ever read, I'll give you this is how bad this can get. Flannery O'Connor's Revelation, the short story Revelation. Has anyone read that? Immediately, if you have not, go home and read it. Do not buy my book. Go into that bookstore and buy Flannery O'Connor's short stories and read Revelation and the story of Mrs. Turpin, who is the self-righteous prig of a woman who, what is between her and God is not her sin, but in the words of Flannery O'Connor, her goddamn virtue is what stands between her and God. It's her self-righteous, I'm going to be a good Christian. And God is like, I'll have nothing to do with that. You know? So I think the transformation happens when, in that moment of powerlessness, in our embracing our own brokenness and saying, I'm out of ammo. And God goes, good, now we can start. Now we got something to work with. As long as you think you still got ammo, we ain't got much to work with here.
So the Buddhists say that we're never closer to enlightenment than in that moment when we surrender.
Yes.
And for Christians, it's the same. You know, for the monastic journey in the Middle Ages, it was the journey up the mountain with purgation being the first step,
right,
followed by illumination being the second, finally union being the summit, where we unite our wills with God. And I always think in the Lord's Prayer, that crucial moment where we say, not my will, but thy will be done,
yes,
is the crucial step. Does that tie in where you say, it sounds counterintuitive, but going backward in the spiritual life can often result in going forward?
Yes.
You told that story that I thought was brilliant about how you were swept out by a riptide in California and nearly drowned.
Yes.
And then you tied in with that. How is it that when you go backwards, sometimes you're actually going forward spiritually?
Well, I mean, the spiritual life is, in my experience anyway, has been frustratingly, maddeningly circuitous, and it's so not linear. It has always been this crazy. So I'm always like, I don't know anything about the stock market, and trust me, I don't know anything about the stock market, but I do understand the principle of watch how things are trending. That's all I can do in the spiritual life, is how am I trending, right? Because like, whoa, it's whoa. I watched my line over the last 64 years, and it's whoa, like this stuff, and then a couple of boring years here, and then whoa, and like, and I'm just trying to watch the trend line, If I look at any one given day, I'll despair. But if I look at it over a long period of time, I hope I'm trending into that direction. Before we're going to do a Q&A. All right. I was going to do another reading, but let's just go to Q&A.
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay.
Does anyone have a question?
Yes.
Ma'am.
Relate the power, we're talking about God with, as they do in the 12 steps, the higher power.
Yeah.
Because, are they supposedly the same? Are they not the same?
Yeah.
Some individuals because they're more comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah.
The word, you throw the word God in, and suddenly some people just, even though they're going through all this or they've done it, they still.
Yeah. Yeah. I was recently with a sponsee who was complaining. I always get the spiritual rebels. A sponsee. So if I'm sponsoring a guy, it means he's new to the program and he's coming in, and he's like, I can't do this whole, get down and worship God thing. And I said, for the last 12 years, you have drank a quart of scotch every day, and you're telling me that you've never had a higher power? I'm a very hard sponsor. Anyway, the beauty of the 12 steps is, right, initially it was a Christian, right, so it would have been Jesus, it would have been the triune God, right? Bill Wilson wanted to democratize the steps and make them available to people regardless of their spiritual orientation. He also knew that alcoholics are universally some of the most stiff-necked human beings on the planet, right? And he knew that, by golly, we're going to have to set the bar pretty low here, which is good because when I read the Gospels, apparently Jesus set the bar pretty low for friends as well, right? Jesus did not set a high bar, right? He did not set a high bar. So I love that the steps set a low bar for people in the spiritual life. It's like, can you just be open to the idea that there's a power greater than you? Now, I happen to know some agnostics and atheist members of 12-step programs. Now, they may interpret a higher power as being the group conscience, right? They may interpret it as nature. I have a friend of mine who talks about the wind being his higher power, and I'm like, that's fine. I'm not here to judge anybody's spirituality. That's way beyond my pay grade. I know, I'm a classic Christian in a traditional sense of the word, but I just love steps are spacious, that they make a lot of room. And I oftentimes tell people, and I know that I don't want to get into a theological brouhaha over it, but I just think I think Jesus shows up incognito in people's life all the time. And frankly, okay, I'm going to go here and say this. I don't think God really cares the name by which you call him. Honestly, I think that's a pretty miserly view of God. So I'm going to give you an example. If I'm going down the street and I come across a person who's bleeding out from a knife wound, and they say, hey, Bob, could you help me? And would I say to them, not until you get the name on my, not until you call me by the name on my birth certificate. Would that, you know what I mean? I'm like, okay, I will help you, right? And then maybe later on I can introduce myself as E and not Bob, right? I think that's how God is. I have seen so many miracles happen in the rooms of recovery. I mean, wild miracles in people's lives who just glanced momentarily at God and said, help. And God showed up. Amazing. I don't know if I answered your question, but I really enjoyed sharing that. Okay.
Yeah, and you've got a huge background in the Enneagram.
Yeah.
Is there any Enneagram type that is more prone to addiction than others?
Ooh, good question. No. But you know how people sometimes say, oh, so-and-so has an addictive personality? Can I just tell you, there's no such thing as an addictive personality. Like, there's no medical or scientific evidence that there is such a thing as an addictive personality. Granted, there are people who have maybe traits of things like poor impulse control, that kind of thing. But generally speaking, I see all Enneagram types in the room. Addictions, alcoholism, overeating, sex, whatever your thing is, these are equal opportunity enslavers. All types welcome, trust me.
Having been exposed to familial alcoholism, the aspect of being a genetic
Mm-hmm.
and it being a personality,
Yes.
negatively socially disposed. The two in combination, at least a few generations ago, were very compulsive towards addiction.
So I think addiction is as I understand it, is a very, very complicated condition. It is not a matter of merely genetic biology. It is familial. It is trauma. It is, it is in many ways socioeconomic in certain segments, right? The creation of an addiction the neuroscience of addiction is stunning. Like, I hate to tell all this to you, but you are wired for addiction. Like, in fact, just to give you a great book, if you want to read a great book on the topic, you could read Dopamine Nation. For those of you who have not read Dopamine Nation, it's a great book. And this book is great too. She's a scientist from, I believe, Stanford. But we live in the most addicted cohort in the history of the world right now. If you're not addicted to something, you're one click away. Really?
One more thing.
Sure.
Combat exposed PTSD and alcohol. You didn't touch on that. Both in Iraq and Afghanistan and in Vietnam, it was very prevalent.
Yeah.
But many men left it behind because of the people that they married to or other reasons. I was wondering if you could comment on that.
Yeah, so, we have what we call comorbidity, right? And so you have lots of, it's very common that a person who presents with an addiction has other conditions present. Depression, generalized anxiety disorder, a whole host of, oftentimes attention deficit disorders, a higher rate of addiction in that population. There are, like I said, it is so multi-pronged. I was in a meeting one time with a geneticist, and this guy was in charge of putting together the meals for astronauts. I thought, wow, a PhD, to get an MD and a geneticist, and he was in recovery. And he said that when he first went into recovery, or when he was thinking about going into recovery, he was still drinking, he said, I decided that I was going to figure out what caused addiction. I'm a geneticist, right? I went to Oxford. I'm a super smart guy, and I'm going to figure it out so that then I could drink normally. That's what he thought to himself. This is so alcoholic, it's crazy, right? Like, this guy is thinking to himself, I'm going to solve alcoholism so I can keep drinking. And he said that he got to a point of realizing it was so complicated. What causes addictions is so complicated and multi-pronged that the only thing I can say is that it is principally a spiritual malady. That was where he ended up. They believed it was a spiritual malady. And obviously, things like trauma play a role in oftentimes in the lives of people who find their way into the rooms. But I know people who would say that they did not have a particularly traumatic background and still ended up in the rooms. So it's hard to know, man. It's kind of it's still awaiting further light. Yeah.
You have a workbook too.
Yes.
Can you tell us about that? What is that
Yeah.
about in relationship?
So there's a 120-page workbook. I worked really hard on that workbook because I wanted it to be something where people could actually do the steps. So I would love it if everybody went to a 12-step meeting. I'm just telling you, I go to church because I need Eucharist and I need to hear you tell me I'm forgiven. I don't know where else in the world I can go to get those two things. Right? Like, that's what I need. I need community. I need Eucharist, and I need to be told I'm forgiven every week. I just think there's something incredible. Where else do we go in the world where we have to kneel? Think about that. The only time in the week that we kneel publicly, right? If at all. Where we're saying that there's something greater than us. I mean, this is important stuff that you do every Sunday or even midweek. It's huge, really. It's mind-boggling. I wish, everyone could have what I also have, which happens mostly in the basements of churches at meetings. But not everyone is going to say, I want to do that. So there's a workbook. You get 4 or 5 people together and say, let's do the 12 steps together. Let's actually go through them together. And it's really laid out elegantly, I think, as a way to just do your own work. Yeah. And derive all the same benefits that addicts and alcoholics do from working a program is available to you.
Let me ask one final question, then I'm going to invite Justin Crisp, the rector of St. Barnabas here in Greenwich, to come and close us in prayer and tell us about the next speaker coming for Courage and Faith. But is there a particular reason why this book's coming out right now? And we're living in a time of great tension in our country and really around the globe. Does this idea of the fix speak to that in some way?
Yes. So I am just acutely aware that people are increasingly unable to navigate the interior distress that they feel. And that addictions, behavioral addictions, chemical addictions, relational addictions, are so out of control now. People are desperate for a fix. They are looking in places that where it will be so frustrating for them. Because anytime you go looking for a fix outside, I think, of a spiritual one, it's like going to the hardware store to buy bread. You're going to be frustrated if you're just going to keep going to the counter going, you guys got bread? No, sorry, but we got wrenches. No, I need bread. You guys got bread? It's like, wow, are we going to do on this thing again? That's what I'm talking about. Like, we live in a time when people also need a plan for living. Like, the steps are such an elegant, simple gospel plan for living. Right? And I love that. I love that they offer to people a way to be in the world that is about reconciliation with God's self and others, and being a life of service to the world. Because that is ultimately what the steps tell us is sort of like the summit, right? Union with God, service to our fellows, right? And that's what we want to be about. And I love it. I love that the possibility that like that workbook could get into the hands of some people who could discover this for themselves.
Beautiful. We want to thank you for a great evening and for sharing deeply with
fun.
us. Your book is fabulous. Fabulous. Now over to Justin Crisp.
Hey, thank you, Merrick. So Ian was good enough to tell you not to buy his book and to buy Flannery O'Connor instead. So it's my job to tell you, go buy Ian's book. Ian will be here to spend some time with us and to sign his books. And please do, have a bite to eat and let's share some fellowship together. Thanks to all of you who have come here tonight, and thanks to all those of you who've been tuning in online. Our next speaker in the Courage and Faith series is coming up very soon. It's on April 5th. She's Eliza Griswold. She's the Pulitzer Prize-winning author, and she's a contributing writer for The New Yorker, has also written for The Times. She has a great, riveting new book about Christianity in America called Circle of Hope, a reckoning with love, power, and justice in an American church. So please do join us April 5th. And with that, let us pray. Gracious God, Heavenly Father, there is so much over which we are so powerless. But you have taught us in your word that your power is made perfect in weakness. I give you thanks, we give you thanks for the candid, the brave way that your servant, our friend Ian, has made his weakness a witness to you by sharing it with us and with your world. Because in it, Lord, your power has been, is being, and will be made perfect. We pray that inspired by his witness, by his sharing with us, empowered by your grace, by the power of your working through the wisdom of the steps, we might approach the throne of your grace with boldness tonight and in the future, and offer our weakness to you, that your power might be made perfect within it, and that we might all finally, at the last, be at home in ourselves, with others, and with you, Lord God. In the name of your Son, Jesus Christ, I pray. Amen. Let's thank Ian one more time. Thank you all. Good night.